Hi there, my name is FixFox and welcome to Heroes of Might and Magic 2. This is the tier list ranking the secondary skills that any hero can learn. I know that everybody and their dog has a tier list, so I'm not going to bore you and spend a whole lot of time going into all of this in depth, but I wanted to make sure that if anybody had any questions, what does FixFox think on the matter? Here you go, you have it. I do want to explain real quickly though, as far as my rankings. S tier is I am never sad to see this on any hero ever. S tier has to be absolutely tip top and very exclusive. If every skill gets into the S tier, the tier ranking is pretty useless. And so the criteria is you are never sad to see this on a hero ever. A tier, there's a lot of uses, and in fact, when used to the fullest extent for your strategy, it is almost irreplaceable. A tier is just below S tier in that regard. B tier is like A tier. I'm not sad to see this skill, but if I had only B tier skills and then C and D tier skills, I would definitely feel like I'm missing out on some better opportunities. C tier is usable, but very niche. Either the map has to be correct, or perhaps the scenario type has to be the right one, or really I have to devote a lot of my strategy on that map to really get the most out of this skill. So C tier has uses, but is not always going to be the thing that you want to go for or just spend your time and energy on. And then D tier is just bad. D tier is pretty bad. If you land in D tier, then you are a filler, and I have no idea why you exist in the first place. So let's get started. Starting off, we're going to have Archery. Archery is a wonderful skill. It has a special ability that most people forget about. Aside from having basic archery that gives you 10% additional damage for your ranged units, that goes up to 25 and then 50% for the subsequent tiers of archery. It also gives you the ability to ignore the penalty 50% in a castle siege. When you're attacking, your archers are trying to shoot troops that are behind the wall, and you deal 50% reduced damage with your shooters. If you have archery, that goes away. You're doing full damage as if there is no wall. I'm not sure how the hero being good at archery somehow makes it so your troops can be like, oh yeah, let me just calculate the angle of the sun and shoot right over and right onto this guy here. But it does. So again, 10, 25, and 50% additional bonus damage for archery. Knowing what we know about damage and how it's calculated in Heroes of Might and Magic 2, any additional damage is becoming multiplicative on top of multiplicative damage. And when we have a table of numbers that is multiplying with itself, it's not exponential. It's not some amazing curve like this, but all of a sudden you can get some crazy increased effects with it. So don't sleep on archery, especially that sweet, sweet 50%. Mwah, chef's kiss. You are not always going to want archery. There are going to be times where maybe you have one of the factions that doesn't have a whole lot of archers. Maybe you're the warlocks and you have your level 1 centaurs and you don't really plan on picking up some other shooters. But then again, perhaps you are the wizards and you have 3 shooters and you're planning on just sticking with your faction units. There's enough variety here that as much as I want to put archery as A tier, I can find myself not necessarily justifying it as a ubiquitous all-purpose spell. There are times when, as a skill, archery is not quite the perfect deal. So the effect size can certainly be all the way up into S tier. I am sure that I can use archery to great effect pretty much every time, but unfortunately it is going to slide down to B tier only because it's not going to be useful every time, all-purpose 24/7. I'm going to have to stick archery at the top of B tier. Next, we have Ballistics. Ballistics, from basic to expert, gives your catapult at tier 1 additional damage. At advanced ballistics, you then go into 2 shots instead of 1, and both shots do additional damage. And then at expert ballistics, you then have 2 additional shots, and you're doing the max amount of damage. When you have the expert ballistics, if you're going even against a knight town who has the fortifications upgrade as their special faction building, you can still bust through those walls fairly quickly. Otherwise, if you have no ballistics, good luck getting to those knights that are already high defense units hiding behind those walls. For me personally, Ballistics is one of those skills that if I'm going to send my adventuring hero out, I'm probably going to want to have Ballistics. How are you going to beat the enemy if you don't have a way to take them out in their castles? If they're just, cramped up there and turtling up, you're going to need a way to break the siege. And Ballistics is the way that you do that. Now, it's not going to go straight up into the S tier, only because there are some maps where the goal is not to completely demolish your enemy. And only because maybe some secondary, tertiary heroes, they don't necessarily want Ballistics. They would prefer some other skills. I'm not always going to be thrilled to see Ballistics on just any hero. And for that reason and only that reason, I'm putting it down into the A tier. Ballistics, 95% of the time, fantastic skill to have. I'm never sad to see Ballistics, but we'll take it as a A tier skill and move on from there. Next up, we have Diplomacy. Diplomacy, just to explain how it works from basic to expert, it will allow you to negotiate with troops that are weaker than the army that you have with whatever hero encounters these neutral enemies. If you are stronger than them by a certain percent, they will talk amongst themselves and say, hey, we should join up with this big guy. That might be advantageous for us. And then a certain amount, a certain percentage of the total neutral creep army will then offer to join you. If you have basic diplomacy, that'll be 25% of the total army will join you. If you have 50%, if you have advanced diplomacy, that'll be 50%. And if you have expert diplomacy, that will be 100%. The entire stack will all join you. Here's the kicker. Whether you have basic, advanced, or expert diplomacy, the cost will always be the same. It will be a fair amount. It'll be like a fair market price for the cost of that army. So if you're walking around trying to negotiate with a whole stack of creatures and you're paying this exorbitant cost for the full stack, but you're only getting 25%, it might cause you to think twice. However, if you can get expert diplomacy or even advanced diplomacy early on, this is an amazing skill that can help you bolster your army early at the cost of whatever extra gold you have. Heck, it might be nice if you are not wanting to invest in a certain town or castle to get your upper unit dwellings, then just go and find some enemies for hire. Find some neutral creatures that you can use then to wage war on your enemies. It is potentially very, very powerful. Potentially, it could be all the way up in the S tier. Because it takes such an investment, though, it's going to fall all the way down to the C tier. You have to invest in utilizing the diplomacy if you really want to get the full value out of it. You have to go into this thinking, okay, how am I going to get my gold? How am I going to fund this strategy? Otherwise, it'll fall flat. And over the long course of the game, you can fall flat on your face and just not pick up the troops that you wanted to have. And plus, you've got to have a big enough army to persuade people to want to join you in the first place. That takes a little bit of startup. What are you going to do? So diplomacy is potentially good. It's not terrible, but it does take some effort to really make it work. Diplomacy falls solidly into the C tier. Alrighty, folks, we now have Eagle Eye. Eagle Eye is a wonderful secondary skill. Let me tell you all about Eagle Eye and tell you how wonderful it is. So if you take basic Eagle Eye, if you use one of your 8 total slots that any hero can have, Eagle Eye at basic level will allow you to fight an enemy and then use one of their spells that your hero saw the enemy hero use. Basic Eagle Eye will let you learn level 1 and level 2 spells for 20% of the time. 1 out of every 5 times, you're going to get the opportunity to watch them do it and then learn how to replicate it and then produce that spell on your own. It will be copied into your spell book for your use for the rest of the time that hero is in your command. At advanced, that 20% bumps up to 30% of the time you'll be able to view the hero using the spell, but now you'll be able to learn 3rd level spells. And then if you get expert Eagle Eye, you will have a 40% chance to observe and replicate any spell that the enemy hero uses while in combat against you. And that will go all the way up to 4th level spells. Folks, a fantastic skill, right? No. This skill is horrible. There are so many limiting factors to this. First of all, assuming that everything goes right, and I do observe the spells that the enemy is casting against me, why would I want to learn the spells why would I want to learn the spells of an enemy who I handily defeated, or even just kind of eked out a victory on? What kind of spells could they possibly be casting that I would really want to learn? Probably not that many, truly. When I think about Eagle Eye, I'm thinking, okay, so even if they use at basic Eagle Eye haste and bless, and now I have those in my stack, okay, all right, great, but I have to see them use it. I have to have already won the fight. This may pay dividends down the road, but up front, not very good. Because it doesn't even capture 5th level spells, that's my biggest complaint about it, is that it won't go all the way up to 5th level spells, so I can't learn the absolute pinnacle of wizardry or sorcery. But even if I do observe it, even if it did go up to level 5, I only have a 40% chance to learn that niche spell that might get used once in battle. Only 40%. Not good enough. Not good. The best way to use Eagle Eye would be if you were a barbarian or a knight and you did not want to invest in your spell guild, or in your mage guild. Otherwise, folks, I'm sorry to say that it's absolutely D tier. It's too difficult to use. There's too many restrictions, and nobody's happy to see Eagle Eye. If you pick it up in a witch's hut, you're kicking yourself and wishing that you could hit the autosave and just reload that turn and try again. Next, we have Logistics. Logistics is a wonderful skill that is going to give you the opportunity to move an additional 10% at basic, 20% at advanced, and 30% at expert logistics in adventure points to be spent on the map. This can be fantastic. First of all, in a game where the adventure map and managing the map logistically is the thing that's primarily going to separate a good player from an amazing player, having more flexibility in how much you can do on that adventure map is critical. You can flag more mines, you can pick up more creatures, you can chase down an enemy that is not too far away from you. You can play this tension game where you're just out of the enemy's range, but you're still threatening them at all times. Having additional movement is probably the most important thing you can do. I'll tell you right now that logistics is our first S tier ability, our S tier secondary skill. Movement is key, and without it, what do you got going on for you? So let's not talk any further about that. I think that you get the gist with that. Let's talk about estates for a second. Estates gives you the opportunity to get an additional 100, 200, 100, 250, and 500 gold per turn. That can stack up very, very quickly. If you do get expert estates on one hero, that's half of an extra gold mine. That is the equivalent to a to the Warlocks faction special town with the dungeon that generates an extra 500 gold per day. That's the equivalent of 1 rock and 2 halflings if you're a wizard. That's like, it's a ton of skeletons if you're a necromancer. The point is that gold is never bad. And on these games where the turns are going to go long, call it 20 to 30 to 50 to 60 turns, estates can really stack up, especially if you're getting 500 extra gold a day. The best thing perhaps to do with estates is not necessarily to have it on your main heroes if you could get the chance to choose, but to have it on the secondary and the tertiary heroes so that they're passively generating income. If you have a witch's hut that's offering estates, every bonus hero is going to be headed towards estates. You can pick that up. So then where does it fall as far as value? I'm not necessarily saying that I want to see it on every single hero, but if I see it on my main hero, I'm not mad. But there are some other secondary skills I would much rather prefer. It is for that reason going to fall into the B tier. Excellent, fantastic, not sad to see it, but there are some better tiered secondary skills. Okay, now we are on to Mysticism. Mysticism allows you to increase the amount of spell points that your hero will rejuvenate every turn of the map. So we go from a base growth of 1 additional spell point per turn for whatever hero, regardless of their class. And then Mysticism at basic level will make it so you regenerate 2 spell points per day, advanced up to 3, and then Expert Mysticism, you will be regenerating 4 additional spell points per turn. On the maps and on the campaigns where you're not going to be able to really stop and resupply your hero, Mysticism can be very, very powerful. There are some things that hold it back, though, as far as its usefulness. For example, it is a very, very low effect size. An extra 4 spell points per day. Considering that, say, like a mass haste will be 15 spell points, it's going to take you 4 turns to generate 1 mass haste. This will give you, like at advanced or expert level, it'll give you an additional bless, an additional bloodlust, an additional slow per turn, but it is still a small effect size considering what it's offering. And not to mention, anytime your hero is going to pop into a town or a castle that has a mage guild in it, you're going to get the opportunity to stay there overnight and replenish all your spell points up to maximum. And there is, of course, the magic well on the adventure map that will do the exact same thing and not cost you any time. Oftentimes you will find magic wells dotted throughout the terrain. It's very rare, in fact, not to find at least one magic well somewhere on a map. So for that reason, Mysticism has a lower effect than other skills, and the effect can be mitigated by other things that you can find on the adventure map and just other game mechanics. So for that reason, I'm going to put Mysticism in the C tier. It's not bad, but there's some very niche uses where it can be helpful. Otherwise, it is a little bit of a wasted or a dead skill, in my opinion. Let's move on to leadership. Leadership gives you the opportunity to have a direct effect in combat because it enhances some combat skills. It gives you +1 at basic, +2 at advanced, and +3 morale for your hero at expert. This is critically important. What does morale do? Because morale gives you the opportunity for your units to have extra turns in combat, you can turn a fight by essentially doubling for 1 turn, or as many turns as you get good morale. You can double the effectiveness of that unit. You can do more attacks. You can have a slow tanky unit take more retaliations. You can really focus in on that one stack of shooters that you just are so mad at and they're pesky and you want to get rid of them. Leadership can do all of that. Furthermore, because morale is the most important factor to consider when mixing armies, if you have expert leadership, you can have an army with the level 6 creatures from many factions. You can have a mix of Titans, you can have a mix of Crusaders, you can have a mix of Cyclopses, you can have a mix of Black Dragons, you can have a mix of Phoenixes. I would still leave the Bone Dragons out of that just because they're going to be a -2 just for having them there, but you get my point. With leadership, you have increased flexibility in the army that you can field, and then once in combat, the morale can absolutely turn the fight. Leadership is an S tier skill. You are never sad to see leadership. Even on your side heroes, even on some heroes that you don't really plan on fighting, if they happen to get attacked and they have just a little bit of troops, morale can be what swings that fight. Absolutely. Never sad to see leadership. Never sad to see leadership. Okay, Necromancy. So Necromancy is an interesting skill in that only 2 faction classes of heroes can get it. First and foremost, the Necromancers, the undead, and secondarily, in some very, very small use cases, Warlocks. Warlocks can get that skill offered to them, but it's very, very rare. You never expect it to happen. And quite frankly, when you're a Warlock and you see it, you were never planning on getting Necromancy, and so you've probably already started to gear yourself towards other skills and other strategies, and it's a little bit of an unwelcome sight in that regard. However, if you are the Necromancers, Necromancy will do wonders to bolster your army. As far as level 1 creatures go, skeletons are not bad. They don't have any special abilities. They don't have a whole ton of hit points. They don't have a very high attack. They don't have a very high defense. They're not very fast. They don't fly. There's nothing about them that's unique and stands out. They're not the best at anything. and yet they're a good all-around purpose type of troop. Knowing, though, that the necromancers can have access to necromancy, and at basic effectiveness can raise 10% of all casualties on the battlefield, 20% at advanced, and 30% at expert, necromancy can lead to some insane stack sizes for necromancers. They can lead to so many skeletons that are raised as the undead for every enemy troop that falls. I'm not saying that you should build every single army around necromancy as the undead. There are times where your stacks are going to fall off, and if you can't maintain a large stack of skeletons, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to use them. It'll be harder in battle to justify hasting them or bloodlusting them or buffing them in some way so you can get the most out of them. But if you can keep your skeleton stack big, strong, and healthy, they have to be dealt with, and they can draw a lot of attention, and they can do a lot of damage. They can win you some fights. So where does that put us on our tier list? Especially because we know that, hey, not every hero is happy to have necromancy. I'm only really happy to see necromancy if it is on a necromancer hero. Does it fall to B tier? Is it so niche that we only have it here in the C tier? I will tell you that it is at the very top of B tier. Unfortunately, because the only faction that really uses it is necromancers, it's hard for me to justify putting necromancy into the A tier, but it has to be at the very, very top of B tier, because a necromancy army without that secondary skill, they're going to have some issues. The undead, the necromancers must have necromancy to really move their faction forward in the early and the late games. Now we move on to navigation. Navigation will allow your hero on water, and only on water, to move additional units of movement points. You'll get a plus 50% at basic navigation on water. You'll get an additional 100% movement points on water at advanced, and an additional 150% at expert. That's pretty good. On a water-based map, you are not sad to see any hero with navigation, especially if you have many islands that you need to get to, especially if it's an extra large map and you are trying to ferry troops from point A to point B. And in fact, it may be much more valuable to try and logistically move troops via boat if you have expert navigation, as opposed to moving them on land. Those are still some niche cases. Unfortunately, I'll tell you right now that I can't put navigation into S tier because there's not water on every single map. There are times when navigation is an absolutely dead skill. If there's no water, if there's no boats, what good is that going to do? It's absolutely useless. I can't put it in A tier because even my main heroes may not love seeing navigation. I can't put it into B tier because Again, most of the time there's not going to be water on the map, and even if there is, maybe it's not enough to really use. Unfortunately, navigation must fall into the C tier, and it must fall into the C tier because it is niche. If you're on a water map, it's a good skill to have. But if it's not a water map, it will absolutely fall to D tier. So the only thing that's saving it from being D tier is the fact that on some water maps, navigation can be fantastic. On to luck. Let's talk about luck for a second. We've already talked about its not quite counterpart, but its, I would say, sister ability, which is the leadership. Leadership gives plus morale. Luck gives plus luck. Basic luck will give plus 1 luck to your hero. At advanced, it'll give plus 2, and at expert luck, it will give plus 3 luck to any hero that possesses it. Now, you rarely ever see negative luck happen. When was the last time you saw negative luck happen? I seem to remember, and I'm just spitballing here for a second, that I remember reading years and years ago on some forum somewhere that negative luck was actually bugged in Heroes of Might and Magic 2 base version. I can't tell you how many times I've seen negative luck occur on the battlefield where instead of doing a normal amount of damage, your troops do half damage. But it can happen. You can get negative luck modifiers. It's just so very rare to see that if you don't have luck, but you don't have any negative modifiers, you're not really going to miss it. Oh, my troops did exactly what they were supposed to do. Okay. Otherwise, it's a very welcome surprise if you do get the opportunity for any unit to do double damage. Not so important for troops consisting of mostly a backbone of, weaker creatures, but a very good hero with a lot of spells. One of those spell casting heroes that really uses their spell book to carry the day. Otherwise, for things like barbarians or, warlocks or wizards that have really excellent high tier creatures that are on the battle, luck can be fantastic. Again, when we're talking about, like with archery, multiplicative damage, if you get the chance to do double damage, then you're having double damage on top of all the other modifiers. And if you already have a really, really strong hero, the damage can get up to extremely high levels very, very quickly. My favorite example, I'm going to say it one more time for those of you that remember, I had 7 Phoenixes that did 952 damage. Because my attack skill was so high, they got up to a base of about 452 damage, and then you double it. You just double it with good luck. And then all of a sudden, you've got 7 level 6 creatures that are somehow doing over 900 damage. Crazy, crazy. So luck is very, very good. Is it as good as leadership? I submit to you that it is not. A low level or gopher hero might see leadership and say, that can help me as far as mixing troops. That can help me as far as, fighting fights I didn't really want to fight, but the enemy came upon me so quickly. Luck, though, does not have so many uses as that. Unfortunately, luck does not necessarily go into A tier because maybe your high spellcasting hero is not going to want to use luck so much. It will fall into the B tier. I am going to rank all of these secondary skills in their respective tier at the very end of this. We will see if luck stays at the end or if it will advance. I'm not sure yet. We'll find out. Let's move on to scouting. Scouting will increase the radius around your hero by +1, +2, and +3 at their respective basic, advanced, and expert levels. Let's talk about how good scouting is. You start off generally with your castles and your heroes, and they have a little bit of vision around them. If you do not have vision, how can you make the best decisions? If you can't see the adventure map, how do you know where you're going? Unless you've already played that map before. Scouting gives you the opportunity to make good decisions. Scouting can be great on your main hero as they're going through the fog of war into the enemy's terrain so that they can be purposeful and precise with their actions. And it can be good on a secondary hero. Sometimes I will buy a hero for 2,500 gold and send them just off into the wild blue yonder so that they can just see what's out there and help give me good information. Maybe see enemies coming in long before they get into my realm, or maybe to pick up some loose artifacts or some loose things that otherwise I might not have even known were there. The point is that information in Heroes of Might and Magic 2, in a turn-based game, information is incredibly valuable. Making the right decision in a tactical strategic game is never going to go awry. And for the reasons I mentioned earlier, where it can be good on a main hero, it can be good on a side hero. Scouting, I submit to you, at all levels and across all heroes, is an A tier skill. That's my opinion. Let's talk about wisdom. Now we have Heroes of Might and we have Heroes of Magic. It's very hard to be a hero of magic if you don't have basic, advanced, or expert wisdom, because if you won't have access to 3/5 of all the potential spells that you can have. I think that there's 65, 69 some odd spells in the game. Yeah, imagine you're only going to be playing with about 2/3 of those, or 2/5 of those. And let's be clear. The higher spells that you get, the greater the effect size is. Level 1, yeah, they've got a haste. Yeah, level 4 has a haste too, except it affects every one of your units. You have a slow that's level 1, but there's a level 4 slow that slows everybody on the battlefield. You have your lightning bolts, you have your ice rays, your cold rays. You have these damaging spells. Yeah. But you've also got Armageddon and Elemental Storm at the upper tiers. And lest we forget, you have the most broken spell in the game that you can't possibly get anywhere else in Dimension Door. I'm sure that a wizard or a warlock is going to run circles around a barbarian or a knight that doesn't have wisdom. So wisdom is important. We're going to put wisdom at A tier only because after I've talked it up so much, there are some maps, there are some instances where you don't have time or resources to invest in your mage guild. I can almost hear people exploding in the comments. How often does that happen? It doesn't happen all that often, but there are map sizes and there are other limiting factors that may make it that, hey, I'm not going to be able to get a level 3 or a level 4 or level 5 mage guild in this game. That does happen. But when it does happen, when you're going to be using spells, wisdom, absolutely S tier. Otherwise, not so much. Wisdom is unfortunately going to fall into the A tier. But to be clear, I'm going to put this up at the very top of A tier right now. It'll be fine. Okay, and our very last skill, pathfinding. Pathfinding is interesting in this regard. If there are terrains that you cannot pass very easily, if your movement points, which is why logistics is in S tier, if your movement points are not being effectively used or squandered because terrain is eating all them up, then pathfinding can be the best thing in the world. But unfortunately, for reasons we've talked about otherwise, S tier has to be able to include a skill that is always going to be good for that hero. You're never going to be sad to see pathfinding on a hero. And that's just not the case. Basic, advanced, and expert pathfinding is only useful on maps where there is terrain that will slow your hero down. And for that reason, I simply cannot put pathfinding into the S tier. It is S tier if the map has desert, swamp, cracked earth, wasteland, snow. In these instances, absolutely, let's take pathfinding and let's use it to its fullest extent. But otherwise, it will only be A tier. It's not going to be bad. I will sometimes take pathfinding, even if I don't know, even if I haven't seen bad terrain yet, I'll still take it just in case. But it can be a dead skill. And for that reason, I cannot in good conscience put it in S tier. It must remain in the A tier. So let's fix these up real quick. Let's start with the S tier. Which is better, logistics or leadership? I submit to you that logistics is. You can't get into the battle. You can't marshal your troops effectively without movement points. Logistics is simply going to be better than leadership in that regard. Leadership has a very high effect, but logistics has a very constant effect. It will always be working for you, whereas leadership will only be working for you in battles. Battles may be one of the most important parts of the game, but they're not the only part of the game. So leadership must be just below logistics. For the A tier, I'm keeping true to my word, and wisdom must stay at the very top. I look at this as, the next into the S tier. If you're going to be using spells, wisdom will be right there into the S tier. As in that same vein, I'm going to put pathfinding up there, because if there's negative terrain, pathfinding could also immediately slip into S tier. So I'm going to rank them in these terms, where if there's spells, if there's pathfinding, I'll put wisdom first and then pathfinding second. Being able to cast spells is a huge part of the game and a huge part of combat and adventuring for that matter. And pathfinding just makes the most of the logistics, makes the most of the hero points that you must spend every turn anyway. And then between ballistics and scouting, making good information is important, but the effect size of ballistics is absolutely crazy. You may not be able to bring down some towns. You may not be able to win some fights as you're trying to invade your enemy's territory and their castles without ballistics. It's just that good and just that important and just that powerful. So I will keep A tier as such in the terms of wisdom, pathfinding, ballistics, and then scouting. On to the B tier. I think I said that if you're a necromancer, that you must have necromancy. And I'm going to look at this tier ranking in that regard, because I believe I do want to stay true to my word in that regard. If I'm a necromancer, this is how I would rank it. I would rank necromancy here, then archery, then estates, and then luck. And if I'm any other hero, I would probably put necromancy at the very bottom. I recognize that. I really do. And so I think that for these purposes, I'm gonna have it be archery, because if you have shooters, it's gonna be very, very useful. No, I'm sorry, I can't do it. If you're necromancers, that's gonna have such a greater effect size than archery anyway. And I'm so battling with this, and I hope you can feel the tension. But I think that I have to put necromancy at the top of B tier because I want it to be A tier. I want it to be A tier. But because its uses are so limited, I have to put it into B. It's not going to slide into C. It's not that niche. It is niche, but it's not that niche because it affects an entire faction, 1/6 of all the factions. So it's not going to be in C tier, but it can't be in A tier. And so I feel obligated to put it at the very top of B tier, even if it won't be the best for 5 out of the 6 factions. Hard choice, but I'm going to leave it like that. And I'm not going to regret that decision. We will take the archery over the estates. Gold is good. Gold can buy more troops. More troops can do more damage, but the effect size of archery is very incredible. An extra 50% damage, multiplicative on top of multiplicative damage. You can make some amazing things happen. Plus, there's many different ways that you can get gold. There's only so many ways you can get additional damage in combat. So luck is also going to be, because luck is a little bit more hit or miss, because luck is not a guaranteed deal. You can have expert luck and go an entire fight without getting a single instance of good luck. I am going to put it just below estates because estates is going to give you a constant effect. It's going to allow you to consistently make good things happen. Luck has a greater effect size, I think, because it can effectively double any stack that attacks. But what good is great luck and doubling a stack if you don't have much of a stack to begin with? In the C tier, diplomacy, mysticism, navigation. I like this ordering. I like this ranking already. Diplomacy, I think that you can have some very, very strong diplomacy games. And in fact, I really want to either find or make a scenario that you can have tons of gold generating items on the adventure map, and then you leverage that into a war of assailing your enemy. I think that would be a very interesting thing to try and make a map that it does that. Perhaps Colossal Caverns does that a little bit. Perhaps a few others. But in general, diplomacy has the potential to be excellent. And I know that I'm a little back and forth with my logic here, saying that, sometimes, the consistent skill should be higher than the one that has a greater effect size. And sometimes the greater effect size, over the more consistent. For example, Mysticism is going to be very effective, but the effect size is so slow that even though it's very consistent, who cares about an additional 4 spell power a day? You might as well have the diplomacy that might generate some amazing results and put that above mysticism. And then navigation. I'm not even going to explain myself. And then Eagle Eye. Eagle Eye, I am proud to say, you have made it to the very, very top of D tier. Not many people get the opportunity to be at the very, very top of D tier. In fact, I think that should be a badge of good honor to you for your service in holding down the fort. Somebody's got to be the worst, and you're the best of the worst. Congratulations. Well done, Eagle Eye. So with that being said, this is the tier list. Let me know if you agree or disagree. And I don't plan on doing a whole lot of these videos because really I'm just there to focus on the Roland campaign, the Archibald campaign, and then the Price of Loyalty campaigns. But all the same, just for those of you who are interested, here is my tier ranking for the secondary skills. And those are my reasons. Let me know where I'm right. Let me know where I'm wrong. I'd love to hear from you. My name is FixFox, and I'm out.